Good evening and welcome to the NTV Fact Checker. My name is Raymond. Our role in this election is to check on the facts being used by the politicians, the facts being used by the Electoral Commission, and the facts being relied on by supporters in making their decisions for 2021, who becomes their representative in Parliament, at the State House, but even at the lower councils. And today, we want to fact check the basic number of how many people are actually participating in this election. It's been made look like the number of people participating in this election is just 11, which is the number of presidential candidates who are running in the race. But we asked the Electoral Commission for an official tally, and now we want to break down those numbers for you. If we could start with the number of nominated candidates to run in this election. There are 91,220 candidates. We'll be getting that graphic for you up anytime now. That shows you the number of candidates who are running in the election. 91,220 candidates are running in this election for particularly three types of offices: the directly elected members of Parliament, the woman member of Parliament, and the local council chairperson offices. Now, that number is a representation of all the people that are running in the race for LC5, for directly elected member of Parliament, for woman member of Parliament, and for particularly the presidency. But we want to break those down to what does it look like at the level of parties. I want to start with the Nationalist Movement. The Nationalist Movement is the ruling party, and of course they come into this election as the majors. They have 43,849 candidates in this election, and those represent 48% of all the candidates who are running in this election. Remember, these are candidates for directly elected member of Parliament, for woman member of Parliament, and for the presidency. At the presidency level, of course, they are represented by Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who is the incumbent who's been in power for 35 years, seeking to extend that reign to 40 years. And below him, of course, they have people in the MP's race, and below that they have people in the LC5 race. I want to move to the second number of independents, the second number of candidates who hold the highest sway in those who are running in the election. Of course, we now have the Forum for Democratic Change, which is the political party that has 6,528 candidates running in the race. That's a graphical representation of 7.1% of all the races that are available for running. The Forum for Democratic Change is represented at the presidency by Patrick Oboy Amuriat, who is the former president of the party, but now he is the party's presidential flag bearer. He's been campaigning in Teso sub-region, and now we'll have pictures for you on that campaign trail later in our news bulletin. I want to move to the third, which is the National Unity Platform. The National Unity Platform, which is represented at the... Okay, let's look at the Democratic Party before we get to the National Unity Platform. The Democratic Party has 2,244 candidates running in this national election. That's a representation of about 2.4% of all the elective positions that are up for the running. Of course, the Democratic Party is represented at the helm by their president, Norbert Mao, who is campaigning in the areas of Acholi and Gulu, and we'll have pictures for you of how that campaign is going. The National Unity Platform, there they are, which is the third in the pecking order of the people who are running in this election, is represented by Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu. They are campaigning for the presidency, but also the directly elected members of Parliament, the woman member of Parliament, and LC5. And they've fronted 4,955 candidates in the race, which represents a 5.4% in the candidature for that race. Now, I want to quickly move over to the next party, which is the Uganda People's Congress. The Uganda People's Congress has 1,639 members running in this election. That's a graphical representation of about 1.7% of the people that are running in this race. But of course, we did talk about at the presidency level, the Uganda People's Congress tactfully withdrew from the race. They had endorsed Akena, who is the president of the party at the moment, but it's still a contested matter in court. But the party stepped away from the presidential race, and they are now contesting in the directly elected members of Parliament. They're contesting at the woman member of Parliament and they're contesting at the local council election level. But we have the second biggest number of people who are represented in this election is the independents. We have independents bringing in about 31,007 candidates. That represents 33.9% of all the candidates who are running in this election. Of course, if you look now at that pecking order, it means that the NRM has the most candidates. The independents come in as the second with the highest number of candidates contesting the election. We have Forum for Democratic Change coming in third at 7.1%. We have National Unity Platform coming in fourth at 5.4%. Then we have Democratic Party coming in at 2.4%. We have the Uganda People's Congress coming in at 1.7%. And now, very finally, I want to talk about the Alliance for National Transformation. The Alliance for National Transformation is a party that's about 13 months into the political model. They are represented at the presidential level by Gregory Mugisha Muntu, who has been formerly the president of the Forum for Democratic Change in the last election. He was the president of the Forum for Democratic Change. He crossed over and formed the Alliance for National Transformation together with other members. And in this election, they are fronting 737 candidates who are a direct representation of 0.8% of all the candidates running in the national election for LC5 and for directly elected members of parliament and for the woman member of parliament. Of course, this is now the big and grander story on the people that are running in the election, and we've given you the breakdown on how the different parties are bringing in the candidates who are running in this election. We will be breaking down those numbers to show you the members of parliament and to be able to show you the woman member of parliament, and then we also show you the local council election. But for now, let's take a break, and when we get back, we fact check a very fundamental statement. Can rioters be shot in an election? Is it something that the law permits? But when we get back from the break, that's what we discuss with the lawyers. The question that we're asking is, does the police have the right to shoot at protesters? I want to start with you. What laws are there on applying of force in particularly a protest and a riot like we saw last week?
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. First of all, the right to protest is guaranteed by the Constitution. Now, I use the word guarantee because the Constitution does not vest that right. That right is inherent. By virtue of being a human, you have the right to protest, and it's guaranteed under our Constitution. Now, what the law does, what the Constitution does, is that it guarantees the right to protest. But that right is not absolute. It is not one of the non-derogable rights we have. And so it might be limited in particular circumstances. But, yes, please.
What we saw particularly was protesters who turned violent at some point. But we also saw security officers brandishing guns. The question is, who does the law favor and what does the law say about incidences? Okay, let's start with protesters. What does the law say about protest? How can you protest?
Okay, thank you, Raymond. Well, you have the right to protest. That is a constitutionally guaranteed right. But you see, when you are protesting, you must not also affect the rights of others. For instance, the rights to trade, the rights to engage in an occupation. So while you express your opinion or your views, you must not affect the rights of others. Now, what the courts have given is a test, and the test strikes a balance between the right to protest and the duty of the state to safeguard peace, and so on and so forth. So in law, it is referred to as the proportionality test, and it looks at about three things. Number one, what is the objective of limiting the right to protest? Is that objective sufficiently important to override the constitutionally guaranteed right? Now, in this case, the objective is to ensure peace. Now, that is, you could say, important to override the right. However, there is other tests. For instance, what are the measures adopted and what are the means? Now, it is called a proportionality test because the measures and the means must be proportional to the intended objective. And so, in circumstances where the measures and the means are excessive, then the infringement or the violation will accrue. Now, in a situation like this, it would be excessive for the police to shoot down people because they are trying to ensure peace. So, whereas the state may have a justifiable objective, it is caught at the point of the enforcement, which in this case is excessive.
I want you to talk to me about the very particular statement that the Minister of Security said, that the police can shoot at you and even kill you.
No,
Is
Raymond.
that founded in law?
No, Raymond.
Yes. What part of the law forbid it?
You see, Raymond, one, you have the right to life. That is also guaranteed under the Constitution. But you see, if we had a state where police would go about shooting people, well, that would not be a democracy in the least. And so the statement in itself has no place whatsoever in the law. It has no merit whatsoever in the law, and it's not allowed in the law. What the law does is it allows the police, in enforcement of its duties under Section 4 of the Police Act, to ensure peace and order. But while the police performs those duties, it has to be mindful not to exceed the limits. You see, you cannot protect somebody by shooting them. That is excessive and unacceptable in the law. Thank you.
Then the question has always been, and particularly in these riots and protests now, reasonable force. That if a man charges at a police officer with a hammer, what is reasonable force to stop them from harming the police officer?
Thank you, Raymond. You see, I'd like to believe that the police officers are trained personnel, more trained than the protesters. And so I would like to think that the police officers can actually contain these protesters even without shooting them. You see that? And so in circumstances where you're shooting someone who is protesting merely because they are charging at you, you see, that becomes excessive. And that is the point I'm trying to press. Yes, please.
Let's talk about rights abuses. What rights were abused in those protests? From what we saw, the beating, the shootings, what rights were abused?
Yes, thank you, Raymond. First of all is the right to life, because when you shoot you and when the police shoots you, you definitely lose that right, and it's guaranteed under the Constitution. And you also have rights against cruel or inhuman treatment, where you have the police shoot at people or batter people. That is unacceptable, and it's actually a non-derogable right under Article 44 of the Constitution. And then you have the freedom of expression. You see, the courts have said that the freedom of expression is the hallmark of a democratic society. It is what marks a democratic society. And so it is important to that extent. So we have a number of those rights that have been violated in the process. Yes.
What remedies are available, and in what parts of the law are those remedies available for victims of human rights abuses?
Yes, thank you, Raymond. In 2009, Parliament enacted the Human Rights Enforcement Act. Now, that act was intended to provide for the enforcement of Article 50. Article 50 of our Constitution is the one about enforcement of human rights. And so, in circumstances where you feel, the law provides for two circumstances. One, where your right has actually been infringed or violated. And two, where there is a threat to the infringement of your right. And so, under Article 50, any person that is a victim who feels their right has been violated, or where they feel there is a threat to the violation of their lives, they have a right to commence an action or to sue in a competent court. Now, it could be the High Court, for instance, where the right that has been infringed is a non-derogable right. You will proceed in the High Court. And then, for these other rights, such as freedom of expression, you will proceed in the magisterial area or the magistrate's court in the area where the infringing acts happened.
I want you to talk to me. What charges can the state place on people who are burning tires, people who are carrying hammers and hitting police officers, people who are breaking into other people's cars? What charges can the state institute against those ones?
Yes, thank you, Raymond. Now, with those, the state could institute actions against disturbance of peace, for instance. But most importantly, even before the state proceeds to institute these actions, it could merely contain them. So, while instituting charges could be what is acceptable under the law, but even before that, the police could, for instance, arrest these people and detain them, but without the actual battering or shooting. Yes, please.
Let's talk about the human rights in general, civil and political rights. What's acceptable in the civil and political rights for presidential candidates like Patrick Oboya-Muriat, for Robert Kyagulanyi, for his supporters, for members of parliament like Honorable Segirinya who've been detained, Nabila Nagai Sempai who's still detained at Nalufenya? What are their civil and political rights?
Thank you, Raymond. Now, unlike the other individuals, the presidential aspirants seem to have additional protection under the Presidential Elections Act. Now, you see, under the Presidential Elections Act, those candidates are allowed a freedom of expression and a freedom or the right to access information. Now, those are the two, I would say, most important rights for any aspirants in a time like this where they are campaigning. One, they need to be able to express their views so as to persuade their voters. Now, they cannot do that when they are detained. You see that? And so the detention surely should be the very last resort. And then two, they should be accorded equal, I would say, opportunity to bear out their views on state-owned media or other media houses. Yes.
The Supreme Court has made very, very good remarks, not even remarks, orders on equilibrium in an election, yes. Equal treatment. What are some of those orders? And as the election progresses now, which parts do we see being violated?
Yes, thank you very much. Now, we'll start from the very one, that is the right to speak to the voters through media, especially state-owned media. Now, about last week, Amuriat was not allowed to speak to his people through the radio. Now, you see, one, the Supreme Court has held, and actually it proposed an amendment to that effect, that you see, it is not enough for the court to merely, for the law to merely direct that candidates should be accorded equal opportunity, but it has gone ahead to place sanctions. And so for state-owned media, where they do not allow that right, then there should be sanctions actually placed on them. Yes, please.
What are some of those sanctions? I know there's been cases before, like UBC versus Kizza Besigye, in which he challenged the fact that he was not allowed to go into a state-owned broadcaster, which was UBC. What are some of the remedies that are available for candidates like Amuriat, who appeared on the radio station and it was shut down?
Yes, in circumstances like those, one, you proceed against the station, whereby court will order, one, it will declare that that candidate was denied that particular remedy, and it will proceed to place a fine or a penalty on that particular media house. Yes.
Let's talk about, finally, free and fair elections. What's the legal test for a free and fair election?
Well, one, a free and fair election is subjective. It's more qualitative in that it's not a black and white situation where you have an ideal situation where people can freely vote and so on and so forth. So there has to be a balance of sorts. And that must not only be done, but it must actually be seen to be done. For instance, the candidates being allowed the opportunity to present their views, that could be an impression of a fair election, or the Equal Opportunities Commission ensuring that there is no rigging. That is also an example of a free and fair election, because the will of the people is actually seen, or it is manifest. Yes, please.
In what parts of the campaigning do we have a free and fair election chances being dented? Would you say, for example, the stopping of candidates like Patrick Oboya Amuriat, like Robert Kyagulanyi, like Henry Tumukunde, and allowing the president to campaign in those days constituted a breach of those free and fair election minimum rules?
Yes, you could say that, because you see, the law requires that every candidate is given an opportunity to freely campaign. And so where you have a situation where one of the candidates may proceed to campaign, but the other is being detained, then you see that does not give a balancing scale. So in a way, that affects the ideal of a free and a fair election. Yes.
Are candidates above the law? Because we have a Public Health Safety Act, under which guidelines are available, under which the Electoral Commission reached out to all these presidential candidates and said, these are the minimum rules within which you can act. Some candidates have been acting over and above those rules, and the police is coming in to enforce those rules. Would you then say that that is a derogation of their rights, or that is actually the police force carrying out its duties as a citizen agency?
No, Raymond. First of all, the candidates are not really above the law. But you see, there is another debate to that about how realistic the law might be. However, the simple answer is candidates are not above the law. And so where you have a law and it's in force, for instance, the Public Health Act and the rules made thereunder, that law, for as long as it is in force, it will bind everyone, regardless of whether you're a candidate or not. And so in situations like now, it is upon the candidates to ensure that they give, it's upon the candidates to make sure that they also are mindful of the safety of their voters, because you see, there is life after the elections. And so I believe even while the candidates campaign, it's important that they also impose some of these SOPs. Yes.
Let's talk very finally. If you want to challenge these public health safety guidelines, we've seen candidates challenge them on public stalls and make declarations against the COVID guidelines. But where in the law can they challenge them? Where do they have to go if they want to challenge these guidelines for them to be able to have large rallies as they want to?
All right, thank you. Now, you see, the law prescribes a mechanism for challenging these laws. And that is why we have the Constitutional Court. And that is provided under Article 137 of the Constitution. So where you feel that a certain act, for instance, is not in tandem with the provisions of the Constitution, you may proceed to the Constitutional Court and challenge some of those laws. And that has been successfully done by a number of people. And so that would be the right way to proceed under the law.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Of course, we've been discussing or even fact-checking the fact, can protesters be shot? And we find nothing in the law where it can be suggested that protesters can be shot. But of course, the police has the duty to protect the property of individuals. It also has the duty to effect the law to its full scale. We'll be back with a fact checker on the next Monday, but we'll leave you in the hands of the news.